Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, the defence team of Laurent Gbagbo opens their arguments at his war crimes trial at The Hague. Lawyers for the former Ivorian leader say that he's a peace-loving victim of French post-colonial meddling. Also, having spent the weekend at the African Union summit in Addis Ababa, the continent's leaders push back against the reach of the International Criminal Court, and the AU decides against forcing peacekeeping troops upon Burundi. And we head out into the bush of Nigeria's northeast to meet the men of the land helping soldiers track down Boko Haram. Our correspondents speak to the traditional hunters turning their skills to the battle against extremism. Lawyers for Ivory Coast's former president on Monday portrayed Laurent Gbagbo as a peace-loving victim of French post-colonial meddling. Gbagbo is the first former head of state to appear before the International Criminal Court. He denies orchestrating post-electoral clashes in which thousands were killed in 2010 and 2011.
Last week, prosecutors said Laurent Gbagbo had clung to power by all means necessary. But on Monday, his lawyers hit back, saying there had been a deliberate smear campaign against their client after the controversial 2010 presidential election.
Ouattara and his supporters wanted to seize power by force. And the Battle of Abidjan was, simply put, the very implementation of this strategy. Alassane Ouattara's communication team have built two opposing figures. On the one hand, the good guy, and on the other, the bad guy. On one side, the Democrat, and on the other, the despot.
According to the UN, Alassane Ouattara won the 2010 poll, but Gbagbo hung on to power for several months, and 3,000 people were killed during post-electoral violence. Gbagbo's lawyers accused France, the former colonial power, of not wanting peace to be negotiated at the time. 6 years ago, French and UN troops helped Ouattara's forces capture Gbagbo. Gbagbo and his former minister, Charles Blé face up to 30 years in prison. On Sunday at the African Union summit, once again, several African presidents accused the International Criminal Court of unfairly targeting leaders from the continent. They even backed a Kenyan proposal to pull out of the ICC.
Well, the African Union is taking a more cautious approach to proposals to send in peacekeepers to help defuse Burundi's ongoing crisis. The original plan had been to send in 5,000 troops with or without President Pierre Nkurunziza's consent. But during talks at the body's summit in Addis Ababa over the weekend, the AU decided against coming on strong and will send in a negotiating team first.
The leaders decided to send a very high-level delegation to discuss with the government on issue of the dialogue, how to revigorate it under the leadership of President Yoweri Museveni of Uganda, but also how we can explain to them very well what is the goal and the objective of this deployment of this force.
Well, that two-day meeting of African leaders also saw nations push back against the authority of the International Criminal Court, a row rooted in accusations that African leaders are being unfairly singled out for the court's attention. Our Duncan Woodside is in the Ethiopian capital. When it comes to peacekeepers in Burundi, he tells us that the idea is now unlikely to get off the ground.
For the time being, it's certainly a U-turn performed relative to the position in December when the African Union's Peace and Security Council came out with a very strongly worded statement which seemed to suggest that deployment of troops was almost a fait accompli. It condemned Burundian political leaders for making inflammatory statements and also condemned reprisal killings carried out in pro-opposition neighborhoods in the immediate aftermath of attacks by dissidents against military bases in Bujumbura and elsewhere. But since then, obviously, there has been a dramatic turnaround in the position of the African Union. Most notably, there was a meeting on Friday night, which was going on late into Saturday morning. And at that meeting of the Peace and Security Council, there were 12 heads of state, all of them against deploying troops to Burundi. So that seems to have squashed the idea, at least for the time being. And Burundi's government, the presidency, claiming victory. The president's chief communications advisor saying that the deployment now is effectively dead in the water. And he's been celebrating that fact. So very, very unlikely that we'll see any troops deployed to Burundi in that kind of context. And what's going on instead is that a delegation from the AU will be sent, although what power they have at this stage obviously is very much open to question.
Well, looking at another big result from the summit, African leaders have backed Kenya's proposal to pull out from the International Criminal Court. It's only a roadmap, but how likely is it that supporters will actually follow it?
Well, certainly it's an endorsement by the African Union of a position that had been put forward by Kenya for some time. This roadmap will now be sketched out because of the adoption of the proposal. Uhuru Kenyatta, of course, has a personal interest in this matter. He was, until just over a year ago, indicted with charges of crimes against humanity. That case collapsed just over a year ago. In terms of how this goes from here, where it goes from here, there is a groundswell of support for Kenya's position. So it's certainly plausible, although it will take a long time to take effect because there are various issues to consider. These states have, of course, signed up to the Rome Statute, and it won't be that easy to pull out, given the legal requirements and the fact that it needs to go through, at least to a degree, through the UN Security Council as well.
Duncan Woodside there for us in Addis Ababa. Look now at some news in brief. In South Africa, 2 local men who beat and stabbed a Mozambican man to death during a wave of xenophobic attacks last April have been sentenced to 17 and 10 years in prison. The pair were caught on camera attacking Emmanuel Sitole and found guilty of murder in November. At least 7 people were killed during unrest that sent hundreds of foreigners fleeing to safety camps. A child was killed and half a dozen people wounded in a mortar attack on the complex of Somalia's presidential palace. Monday's shelling targeted the Villa Somalia in Mogadishu, but several rounds struck surrounding civilian neighborhoods. No groups yet claimed responsibility, but Al-Qaeda-linked Al-Shabaab extremists have carried out similar attacks in the past. In Nigeria, the Borno State Commissioner says that at least 85 people were killed in an attack on a village by Boko Haram insurgents. Witnesses say that Dalari was torched and razed to the ground by gunmen who attacked over the weekend. It was the 3rd deadly raid in the area in 4 days. Well, despite that ongoing threat of Boko Haram attacks in Nigeria's northeast, some of those who've been displaced by years of violence have started going back to their homes. The cautious return has been made possible by a massive military offensive against the insurgents over the past year. Some of the operation's successes are down to the involvement of traditional hunters who track down, alongside government troop, Boko Haram insurgents. France 24 joined some of them in Adamawa State to find out more.
Traditional hunters are at the forefront in the fight against Boko Haram. For decades, these men have lived on the fringes of society. But in recent years, they have gained widespread recognition by helping the military hunt down Boko Haram. Thousands of hunters across Adamawa, Borno and Yobe State take pride in rooting out insurgents.
We intercepted this yesterday from some people who are not from our community and who are of questionable character. They're not the type that the government welcomes. We encountered them while on patrol and collected this from them.
Hunters were informally recruited en masse in August 2014 and have been helping to win back territory ever since. At one point, Boko Haram controlled around 90% of the region and declared it an Islamic caliphate. They laid claim to public buildings, burning down schools and churches as they advanced. Local people had 4 choices: convert to Islam, flee, die, or fight back. And that is exactly what traditional hunters did and do to this day. They patrol a vast region using their expert knowledge of the terrain. By collaborating with hunters, the military has succeeded in pushing back Boko Haram out of almost all towns and villages. The insurgents are now confined to a few pockets, including the Sambisa forest, a place hunters know inside out.
We know there are places where Boko Haram sits. So sometimes we can go with soldier and go and meet them near the Sambisa.
The hunters say that Boko Haram fighters continue to hide in these mountains that straddle Nigeria and Cameroon, lurking in caves by day and raiding villages by night.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa for now. Do stay with us for a short break. More coming up.